First off, thank you so much for agreeing to hop on the stream and chat with me today, Data. Why don't you give people who are just coming in, who maybe don't know you as well, a little bit of background as to how you got to where you are and a little bit about your history.
Wow. Well, thank you for having me. Um, I am Data. I started out in Rainbow Six Esports right at the end of 2018. I started out as an analyst with no experience, and then transitioned from Space Station into free agency. I worked an event with Team Reciprocity, and then I moved over to TSM's R6 team for about 2 years, 2.5. Uh, and then I had like an in between from TSM R6 to TSM Valorant, where I attempted and failed to do both, and then swapped over to Valorant full time. Uh,
The typical
for
esports wear five hats at once.
Oh yeah, that definitely was wearing 20 hats at once at that time.
Yeah. Uh,
Um,
yeah, and then let's talk a little bit about the Rainbow Six though, because that was, not an esport I actually have a lot of familiarity with, especially at the pro level. I haven't worked with, I think I've worked with maybe one or two players, but nothing at the org level. Um, what did you? So you were a strategic coach with them, right? What was that
yeah, with
process like?
TSM.
How long did you coach with them for before you realized, okay, we have a championship roster here?
Um, well, so with TSM, I started as an analyst, like in general, which was just a lot of it was a lot of the strategic work for like opponent prepping, scouting. But I knew from the people that I had worked with prior that I had like coaching potential,
Mhm.
because of the amount of effort and work that I was putting in, my understanding of the game. So I knew going into the TSM project that I wanted to coach, but I also knew that I didn't have the leadership skills. Like I didn't have the confidence in myself to be a head coach. Because originally, when I joined, I was given the potential to trial as head coach, and I told them that I would just be like a temporary head coach. That we needed to find a solution because they needed the best for me, and at that time, it wasn't going to be as a head coach.
Mhm.
So I focused a lot on strategy and more talent development,
Mhm.
individual player development, as well as the scouting that I had prior. Um, and I mean, pretty much out of the gate, watching that roster, because before I joined, they'd gotten seventh in the previous Pro League season, and nearly they were one game off of getting relegated.
Wow.
And I got to watch them scale up in the background. Like while I was doing my trial, I
Mhm.
got to watch them scale up as individuals, and like you can kind of see like certain players that you play with, you can just tell that the game and their understanding of how to perform just clicks different than others. Um, Anything from in FPS games, like your movements can be like a big indicator of your like, skill. And when I was watching those players versus my prior like players who were also really talented, I think 8 of the prior players went on or had previously been like at like world championship or world contender status.
Mhm.
I could just tell instantly that that roster was like going somewhere, and that I wanted a part of it because I knew like what they needed to kind of get that extra 10%, 15% that they needed to like stay at the top.
Yeah. What do you think separates? I mean, a lot of rosters obviously are kind of hodgepodges of, okay, let's take these players that we think we have championship potential, put them together, see what they can do. What takes a team from that kind of, we are fresh, we know we have the talent, to making that transition into an actual championship team?
I mean, I think for the most part, it is going to be a lot of like personality meshing. You have to make
Mhm.
things work in this industry. But I think the scouting that Scales, the GM for like TSM had done prior with the team manager Smack, they found like a really good core. Like I would say like 3/5 of that roster always was going to get there. It was just a matter of getting like the two final pieces to mesh, whether it was a player that was there for practically since the beginning that needed was personality conflicting, or having to bring in another piece because one of our players moved to the head coach role.
Hmm.
Um, but I honestly think it just was time. I think we got very lucky in R6 that it is a little bit more of a neglected esport. I think R6's strategy is probably the highest outside of like maybe StarCraft, but for a team game, I honestly think it might be the highest. Like Valorant has the same like ability mechanics. It doesn't have the economy, but in R6, like each round, you can change your agents. You
Oh
can
wow.
like manipulate the world. So it's like if you are familiar with like tactical like FPS games,
Yeah.
usually you have a map and you play in the map, but in R6 you can manipulate the map. You can open
Right.
up walls, you can shoot through walls, you can drop like from floors. And so it allows you to have a lot more diversity in strategy. So I think it's like really hard because every player that I've worked with in Valorant that's played Siege just said that it's like that they don't think that they could play it at the same level. They might have the same mechanics, but that it just takes a lot of you're overloading your brain with strategy as a player.
Do you think that's translated well into your role now in coaching Valorant?
Yeah,
Does
it's a different kind of strategy now because it's a lot of like building protocols. If this happens, here's how we're going to respond. And you
right.
have that in Siege, but there's so much diversity in Siege that you like. It depends on the team, like kind of environment that you can get. But I think we got really lucky in Siege because it's a really good esport. It takes a lot of skill mechanically and mentally.
Hmm.
Um, but because it's not seen as big of a target as CS:GO, Valorant, League,
Hmm.
is that we weren't prone to many like changes. Essentially, how I tried to run the team was I would document everything that we were going through, every issue that we had, every solution that we found. If the org ever had a question of why we were struggling at a given point, I could give them the reason why I believed we were struggling and the solution that we were trying to work towards, and kind of built us a process. So we were on an island,
Hmm.
so to speak, where as long as we provided results, which we did, and as long as we had a process for like getting in the direction that the organization wanted, we were allowed to just scale. So
Sure.
it became kind of like our project as opposed to being like an org project. Like the org
Yeah.
still provided us with the resources.
But I think that's really, really helpful because what I've seen a lot in LCS level, Valorant level, even is org management can sometimes interfere with the coaching process, right? Like if you have a roster that you think has the potential to be really good, but is going to take a certain amount of time, that may not align with the org's kind of goals of, hey, we need to win this split or we need to win now, right?
Yeah,
And I've
yeah,
seen a lot of that where org management sort of sometimes it even interferes with coaching staff, interferes with the ability to like get players to the point they need to be. So it's kind of cool that you had sort of this, you have the support, probably financials, resources, all that stuff, but they also let you just do your thing.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big thing, 'cause especially for like league is like sometimes orgs have, especially because a lot of the ownership does come from league. It's like typically it's like league or StarCraft or like the
Yeah.
big two. Typically what you'll see is the owners still think that they have an idea of what it takes, when there's the potential that when they played the skill level for their esport, like they would have been around like modern days, probably like silver gold.
I definitely I
Um,
think TSM is a unique example of that for sure. Where
well,
the
yeah, I've seen a couple other orgs
yeah.
where they try to have like a big hand, and like
Yeah.
sometimes their philosophy for building rosters is they look at the meta and they say like take support for example for league is like, all right, we're expecting that this is going to be very enchanter heavy meta, so
Mhm.
then they're going
Mhm.
to prioritize getting an enchanter support over a
Right.
hook support as opposed to getting a solid foundational support,
Yeah.
and then getting like a if you got like a it's pretty unique to league but like a lane coach,
Right.
so
Right.
you would get someone that can like specifically accelerate that player skills with whichever support is needed for the season,
Sure. What
which
do you
allows them to have
yeah.
that longer role.
So going to T1 now, what's that process been like? What's the environment like now for you guys?
Um, I really like the environment here.
Yeah.
Our GM, he focuses heavily on the culture of the team. Um, he says above anything else, he wants to make sure that there's a good working culture because that allows you to foster healthier environments.
Mm-hmm.
And I I think it's a little bit more like similar to like my R6 project with TSM than it was my Valorant roster with TSM,
Hmm.
where a lot of it was very poor structure from the coaching level um, for like before franchising or the partnerships, and then afterwards was the like short-term immediate results, which I like, was not comfortable with or familiar with as a coach,
Yeah. Yeah. That's,
which
I
is a
mean,
lot of learning, which is a
I
lot of
mean,
learning.
yeah, fighting for short-term results when you don't have the roster built for that is sort of doomed to failure. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you either have a developmental roster that you did not invest heavily in terms of financials, or you have a superstar heavy roster that you invested heavily in that needs to win. Like it kind of doesn't make sense to do both. Like, um,
yeah. And at the time for the TSM project, it was originally the latter, and
yeah,
then it became the former like a week before we signed our roster.
yeah,
Like we had one of the other rosters lined up.
yeah,
They ended up getting like second in the like all of the Americas
hmm,
ascension, and then that fell through due to budget costs, and then it was just make the best of what you can,
yeah,
which
yeah.
I think we did. We had a few hiccups, but I think we made the best of it.
And you're working with a few players that I know very well. I'm a big fan of the T1 roster now. They used to play with Cloud9. I know a couple from T1 when they were here actually. So I had the opportunity to work with T1 Valorant when they were before franchising, when they were maybe going to be in North America. So it's yeah, interesting time. And then Autumn, like your guys' coach right now. How's it been with him?
Autumn's a really great guy.
Yeah.
I think his coaching style and Stunner's coaching style, like the three of us, like we have very different coaching styles, but
Hmm.
it's kind of like it's like the perfect triangle.
Yeah.
Like Autumn's very leadership oriented, Cody's very strategic oriented, and then I'm very much like player development and communication oriented. So it
Hmm.
works out like
That
almost perfectly.
that's what I was gonna ask is like, what's your specific role? So it's more the player development side.
Yeah, I focus a lot of communications. I'll still do like some strategy,
Hmm.
try and like, more so be the jack of all trades to fill in what we need. But my big priority for like the upcoming split or the previous split was communication and
Hmm.
like, player development,
Hmm.
and then upcoming is a lot of like, player development, just squeezing out the extra like 2% that we can get from each player.
Hmm.
So we have a really good roster. We have really good identity for a team. So it's kind of just making sure that all the pieces kind of are able to perform when the time comes.
Yeah, and you're in Korea
Yeah,
right now.
yeah,
Nice, awesome. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you're working remote or if it
yeah.
was actually like in person. That's always challenging because in esports, like a lot of teams right now to cut costs, they are doing a lot of remote work with coaching staff and stuff like that too. They usually have a lot of players like in person, but then it's always better, I think, in person. Are there any challenges that you're having culturally going to Korea, working with Korean players, Korean coaches, all this stuff?
Uh, I don't think so too much. I kind of like like the Korean teams right now. Like not to be disrespectful to
Hmm.
NA, but I enjoy suffering with the crazy work schedule. Like I think for a lot of the years I was bouncing between like 14 hours to 18 hours a day of work, whether it was like doing stuff in game or like coding for our analytics systems. And so coming here and being able to work and have like players and coaches kind of have that same mentality, like even if it isn't necessarily like the healthiest, it's just a part of the culture.
Yeah. No, I mean,
And it matches really well.
I actually really, I think that the West, when they talk about toxic work cultures and having better work-life balance, they're skewing that because you're doing work that you want to do, right? If there's an aspect of when everyone is working together towards the same goal, then those hours become more meaningful. It doesn't feel
Oh
like
yeah.
burning out. Versus what I've seen a lot of here is players and coaches will feel like they're burning out because they may feel like they're the only ones putting in 12, 14 hours, and they'll see someone else go home after like 6 and they're like, what the heck, like why am I grinding right now? And I think it's definitely a larger environmental thing than it is just
I
the
could agree
number of
with that.
hours, because I've had periods of that too when I've been grinding in school or at my job, and if it's a flow state and I'm really passionate about what I'm doing, those hours kind of just fly by, and you don't feel at the end of the day like you're burnt out, like you know, just wasted all this time or anything. I definitely think the direction and the environment helps a lot with that. So
I could agree with that.
yeah.
'Cause like here we'll finish we could finish a 14-hour day and the players will go and they'll play ranked together for a little bit, and then we'll go out to eat all together. And while
Hmm.
we're eating, we're talking about scrims or matches or things about the game, things about
Hmm.
the team.
Hmm.
And then they go back and they play ranked together again. So it's like we want to talk through the issues that we have. We want
Yeah.
to like we're passionate about esports. We're passionate about the game.
I think
Versus I've had
that's
some rosters in the past that don't match that identity at all.
I think that's a really really big challenge for a lot of Western teams to match, because the eat sleep live the game mentality is seen as unhealthy here. It's almost seen as like obsession or addiction, when you know, if you're thinking like, if when I ask players, I always ask players and coaches this: what's your goal, right? And in NA, especially in league scene, a lot of them say I want to win worlds. I'm like, do you actually want to win worlds, or are you trying to win worlds, or is that something that you're conditioned to say? Because if you want to win worlds and you're not working as hard as Faker, how are you trying to win worlds?
Yeah.
You know, like he's literally winning worlds and he's working harder than you. So I don't like there's a disconnect there, right? There's a little bit of a paradox when you say that. Um, do you have any set goals for this season, this upcoming split?
Outside of team goals, my individual goals aren't really set in stone. I try and have ambiguous goals as far as like how I work with a specific player.
Hmm.
I try to not have set performance goals because I mean, as hard as it is, like going to like touch up on like the faker note is it's very hard to stay on top. Like it's
Yeah.
very easy, and I think it's very easy for people to get complacent is like
Hmm.
the big like buzzword in
Yeah.
North America. And it's also hard to like once you get into like the first place position, it's hard for you to grow because you essentially have to be like you have to find the meta before everybody else while
Hmm.
being at the top,
Hmm.
and everybody else is going to be watching your VODs. They're going to be trying to emulate how you play, so you have people catching up to you.
Yeah.
Which is why if you look at Faker, like he puts in an insane amount of hours. If you look at all of T1, they're putting in all the hours together more than anybody else. So it's like, how can you catch up to someone if you're not putting in the hours?
Yeah.
You don't have the skills that they have right now, and they're still putting in more the hours.
That's always been the
Uh,
challenge. Like you have to either innovate or you have to find the meta first, or do something different,
yeah.
right?
So,
What do you think about relative power level or strength level of your region right now versus EMEA, like Americas?
I think so. This is actually like a big like hornet's nest to get into,
Hmm.
and I'm happy to get into it. I think right now, like Pacifics has always been like the weakest region.
Right.
And more often than not, it's in like tactical FPS games outside of Overwatch,
Hmm.
which is its own case. Um, I think it's the weakest right now as far as macro play. I think that's it's actually a coaching issue that is neglected in like tactical FPS games. And I think the if I want to generalize as quick as I can, and I do want to get into it a bit more,
Hmm.
is in the Pacifics you don't have the ego as long as you have like coaches and like IGLs that have accolades, because the culture is very much about you give respect, you give trust immediately, but then as soon as that trust is broken, it's gone, like that respect is gone.
Hmm.
um, Whereas my experience in North America is, especially from a lot of the old like CS:GO heads that are in Valorant, it's very gatekeepy. It's very ego driven.
Hmm.
Um, so while they still have like they bring in a lot of the CS:GO structure that allows them to be like short term, a little bit more sound as like if they go onto a roster, they're going to do okay. But because they're trying to play Valorant like Counter Strike, or they're trying to play Counter or Valorant like old Valorant was, which is like very much like old structure and pretty much just like a shooter game as opposed to a strategy game or
Hmm.
like a growing game, it's going to push them to fall behind a lot because a lot of the rosters are built around inefficiencies or nepotism. Um, some of them are trying to grow, but the pieces just aren't there as far as like knowing like the direction that they want to go long term. A lot of like North America's built with like the shareholder mindset of we need short term results, we need short term like benefits,
Yeah.
um, and then Europe is very structured. Um, and then technically Brazil is packed in with the like North America.
Right.
But I think it goes. I honestly think it goes Europe, Brazil, North America, then Pacifics right now.
Interesting.
Um,
That is a hot take.
and it's hard because I think like EU is going to start falling behind because
Yeah.
they've been a one region team. And when I watch them right now, they lack a lot of identity when it comes to like understanding how they want to play the game outside of the like the structure and discipline that is like embedded in like an entire continent's culture, so to speak. Like the Russians are very structured, very in my experience of working with Aang was like very much like you play as disciplined as you can be, you
Right.
play as perfect as you can. And in a game like Valorant, that doesn't necessarily always click. Like sometimes you just have to shoot heads. I mean,
Right.
the joke
Right.
is always just
Just click
you're gonna
heads.
build up all the strategy and then you're just gonna get shot in the head.
Yeah, it's true.
Doesn't
It's
matter,
true.
all the utility in the
I
world,
mean,
you're still gonna get shot.
and that's what watching champs last year. It looked like EU was basically just Fnatic. Like the rest
Yeah.
of the
Oh
teams
yeah.
were a tier below them by far, and the fact that North America almost sent three teams in was like, the kind of I felt like North America is the Americas, I should say, not North America. The Americas should have been the strongest region, and across the board, I actually really liked that they started bringing Brazilian teams or South American teams in. I think that really raised the parity level of the league. And it forced a lot of teams. We're seeing that this year now, finally, where there's this intermixing of rosters. So all the rosters, Loud, Furia, Leviathan, like they brought so much talent into North America that sort of immediately saturated the ecosystem from the bottom up too. There's like four or five teams that could be arguably super teams right now in the Americas, which I think is really good. I mean, I've always thought you don't want one team dominating your region. You want four or five that could potentially all be competing for a championship, because then the parity goes up. That forces them all to innovate and be better. And then when you go international, ideally you have two or three really good teams going in.
Yeah,
But
my concern with Brazil is like I like their play style and I said that they were the second best,
mhm,
but my concern is for them is that they moved to Americas,
right,
like the North, like they combined the Americas together
mhm,
because there's an entire tier three, tier two region now that just doesn't get tier one exposure. Like they don't get to scrim the like all the Brazilian teams that would be
yeah,
there.
yeah,
And that means that long term, like you might see like Loud, Leviathan, MIBR, Furia, like they're gonna have a harder time scouting players
yeah.
if they aren't able to have like a lot of firsthand experience
Well,
with some
yeah.
of the players
I,
in the
I
region.
found it interesting that a lot of those teams ended up signing North American players. Like a lot of the EG roster went to LATAM teams, which is like, I mean, I think it's good. I think they're obviously good players, but you're right. Does it water down your region? Does it take away a little bit of what they had? But somehow Brazil too, or South America, they developed a lot of that talent internally, right? So you would think, because those players came up, like maybe there's more there that will continue hopefully fostering a really strong tier two scene down there. I'm actually more concerned about tier two in North America, where because of lack of funding, tier two almost just kind of vanished. And then, recently with the
Yeah.
the issues with the guard, you win Ascension, your entire org folds. All of a sudden, what's the point? It feels like a lot of tier two players are like, well, that was the goal. Now that doesn't even look stable. What are we gonna do? Um, do you see any issues like kind of along those lines in the Pacifics with like tier two, tier three?
I don't think so with the Pacifics. I think North America is like a very hard case because the cost of living,
Sure.
unless you're living in like Kansas City, where it's like maybe you can get an apartment at like a decent place for like $1,000 a month.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, like if you're at West Coast at all, which is where you kind of need to be for the esport,
Yeah.
and you're looking at having to room with 4 or 5 people and
Yep.
then still have to pay 2,000 for rent,
It's
and
the old school
it's
grassroots dream. You got to get a team of four other people, and you guys got to sit in your house
yeah,
together and
yeah,
eat top ramen
it's
while you grind.
it
I'm
just
not advocating
it's
for that. That's it's
yeah. It's just very hard, especially, like, this is part of the ego thing is, like, it's very hard for players that were getting paid an insane amount of money.
yeah,
'Cause, the money that Challengers is getting now is what or, like, half of Challengers is going to be getting now is more than what the R6, like, tier 1 was getting.
yeah,
'Cause,
yeah.
like, right now, I think there are some teams in R6 that aren't getting paid at the tier 1 level, and some of them are only getting paid, like, around, like, $1,000 or less,
Jeez,
depending on their league,
wow.
and it's like, you come into Valorant pros that are making upwards of 45,000 a month,
Yeah,
and you're just like,
that's not gonna
it's
last. I
a
mean,
very big scale.
yeah, I mean, we saw it in league where pay scales or pay rates were obscenely high for certain players. All of that's kind of vanished with kind of the loss of funding now. So, in some ways, it kind of again forces players to actually be better because if you're at a base minimum salary and someone else is at a base minimum salary, you actually have to be better than them. It's like
Yeah,
it's not even a discount thing anymore, right? Um, I was actually really impressed with Pacifics going back to kind of champs last year. PRX, like DRX, a lot of these teams actually showed up much stronger than I thought they would be, given that their player base is so much smaller, especially in the FPS community in Korea and now China. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with Chinese players kind of getting into Valorant this year now too. How do you feel about that? Like I know China's always kind of been that powerhouse in esports because eventually they're what 2 billion people will start to play the game, and
yeah, yeah,
that's just terrifying. Um,
um, I think it's gonna be like, they're gonna be very strong very quick.
mm,
What I've noticed is there's certain teams that you can't scrim because they'll only wanna scrim the better teams, and what they do is when they play you, they're very good at breaking you down, and then the next time you play them, they are running your setups, and they're just, like, better, like, not necessarily than you, but they're like their scaling is, like, 20% better than the last time you played them,
yeah.
and it's terrifying. So, like, we're gonna have to have some, like, symbiotic relationships where we push them, and then we have to just I'm not a, like, a religious man, but I just have to pray that we scale as quickly as
I
they
mean,
can
I think
because the
yeah.
region is terrifying.
Do you think it's an infrastructure thing or like what causes that? Because like
Um,
again, my comparison is usually league where China's been very strong. They have massive infrastructure support compared to like North America in terms of coaching staff, in terms of developmental pipelines, in terms of talent scouting. Like they have a
Yeah,
lot better
they
system.
just dump a lot of resources. Like,
Yeah.
they try and work off of infinite money. I've heard of teams that have, like, in the background, they'll have, like, 5 to 10 extra support staff doing, like,
Jeez.
very specific things.
Yeah.
Um, but I honestly think it's very similar work culture to here.
Yeah.
Um, That's something I wanted to, like, touch up on, like, previously is, like, the difference in players for, like, the different regions, and I think it helps in this context as well is, like, the way that like, if you look at League of Legends as an example, the way that talent is developed in Korea is very much like, players are as aggressive as they can be in ranked.
Hmm.
They're very much focused on grinding and having more hours than anybody else, which allows them to improve their micro, which is why you'll see a lot of like insane one tricks in Korea. You'll see a lot of pros are like very much micro driven, and then it's up to the coaches to kind of build the macro and build their like the teamwork of those players. So you take like five like really fresh players that are mechanically gifted, and you have a coach that either teaches them or gives them essentially like a formula for if this happens, here's how we're going to react. And that was what I was going to touch up on as far as what Pacifics is neglected, why
Hmm.
they're the weakest region, is because in FPS games, it isn't as prioritized as much for coaches to have as much experience. Like, there's not as much like CS:GO coaches. There aren't as many CS:GO coaches that are from Korea. So it's very difficult for like Korean speaking teams to like thrive in this ecosystem. but I think now a lot of teams are starting to import, especially China has been looking to import a lot of the coaches from other games or from other regions.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to be like a big driving factor is that they have the resources and they have the infrastructure to just toss someone over with a translator or bring someone in that can speak like Mandarin or whatever the like
Yeah. Language. Yeah.
whatever language needs to be. Because like here is like the players that we have, they're already confident in their English speaking, but like they do have like lessons to be able to improve. Or like
Sure.
we have a player that's learning Korean. Um, I think that um, that direction is going to be very scary for Americas, for Europe,
Yeah.
for like Brazil, because you have a region that's so hell bent on winning and putting in more hours, putting in more work, putting in more for their micro performance. That if they can get the macro, that it will be very, very
Yeah.
hard for
And
other teams to beat.
the macro is sort of only a matter of time, right? That's just based on strategic analysis, making good
Oh yeah.
kind of deductive reasoning about it, and then coming up with solutions. I definitely think I agree with you. That's been the hardest thing in North America is we keep talking about League, even though we're mostly talking about Valorant now. But trying to
Yeah.
convince players to grind more solo queue is kind of worthless because our solo queue is different and not as good. We have ping issues, so micro is already at a deficit. And what I've seen a lot of, like in terms of FPS though, uh, our players are, well, let me ask this. Is Korea, are you noticing that Valorant is becoming more popular? I mean, League dominates Korean, internet cafe culture and all that stuff right now, but do you think Valorant is growing a larger player base in Korea?
I can't speak for Korea. I know that Valorant is the number one esport uh, for Japan. I think it's
Yeah.
like up there with Apex.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it might have just surpassed Apex. Um, but I do know that it's growing, but I don't think that it will ever like it's very hard to fight up against League
It's not
here.
going to touch League, no. But I'm curious because like the interesting thing is you mentioned you touched on this too. Why was Overwatch such an anomaly in Korea? Because they're typically not known for their FPS players, right? Internationally,
Yeah.
but for whatever reason, the best like Overwatch players in the world are all Korean.
I think it's like there's strategy in Overwatch, but it's very micro heavy. Like you have to learn a lot of timings, but once you learn those
Hmm.
timings, it's about the micro engagements you take because
Hmm.
everything is like it's all controlled chaos. Like whenever you look at the team fights, like if you're an outsider,
That's why I couldn't watch.
you have no
Like
idea what's
I
like going
never knew what
on.
was happening.
But then for those players, they're looking for certain keywords to be called out. As soon as they hear a keyword, they disengage, they do a certain rotation.
Uh huh.
And this is like generalizing because I've worked with a couple Overwatch players, but they have very different perspectives on how to play the game
Hmm.
from like Corey to Carpe. It's
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
different. Um, but I do think it's very much because Overwatch is a lot of micro heavy engagements and it's a lot more extended team fights, as opposed to like a lot of FPS games is either one or two shots to the head and you're dead.
Right.
Um,
The time to
and
kill. Yeah.
Overwatch, the time to kill can be very fast depending on the situation, but typically it's not
Yeah.
because the characters that can get one shot have high mobility, and it's the you got the cracked 17-year-old, 18-year-old that's just
I've heard some from some
going insane.
aim coaches that if you're an Apex player or you're an Overwatch player, your aim is just like head and shoulders above a lot of other FPS players because there's the vertical component that you have to account for. Whereas like in
Oh,
CS:GO, you never really have to traverse more than like 15, 20 degrees in terms of vertical to,
yeah,
horizontal.
yeah,
So, but in Overwatch, you got people flying over your head and then you have someone else under you and like, you're
yeah.
flying and stuff. It's crazy. I can't watch
We got
that.
a bit of that in R6, and
Yeah, yeah.
you'll hear a sound, and you know that someone's just opened up a hole right above you.
It's so
You
crazy.
gotta either move or you gotta look up as quick as you can.
Actually, okay, yeah, actually, no, I take it back. They said the best aimers are from Quake. And
That's fair.
and then after that was like, yeah, Overwatch, Apex and all that. And longer time to kill actually necessitates better aim because you have to stay on target for much longer.
Yeah, it's a lot of tracking aim.
Yeah.
So
There's an interesting question here. So do you use what are your thoughts first of all on data, analytics, that kind of thing in esports? There's sort of I have my own opinion on it, but there's sort of a controversial like debate about the application of data and analytics.
It depends on the esport. So this is my like that's my home territory. My origins is in data analytics.
Okay.
So when I started in R6, I built like a machine learning platform for R6 analytics because in Rainbow Six there is no API
Mm,
for tracking information. You just have to pray that people are entering in the stats right. Like the number one stats page that was in R6 that like professionals were using. At one point, it went all the way up to there was like 60% accuracy was like the peak that I was getting for like data overall when they were trying to track like micro data for like individual like kills and stuff like that. It was just heavily off, or
wow.
you'd go up against an opponent and like there's an example of a time where they had said that a team had banned a map 3 times in the same game, and then it like increased their bans even though it was their best map. It increased their like recency like ban rate by an insane amount. And they were like, so the example is like Team Empire in R6 is like the best consulate team ever, and it
Mhm.
showed that they had just banned consulate 3 times. And so anybody that was naive enough to like go in and be like, oh, like just look at the stats, be like, oh, they're banning like consulate, like we want to actually get this map. There's like a chance that you're picking the opponent's best map because of how bad it was. But I built an automated system to like pull from the VODs like the individual stats and to pull like the map stats.
Huh.
I think going to that level, like I essentially automated it to do all of the stats grabbing and all to kind of understand meta trends based off of like the logs for like like the patch notes
Mhm.
to give like cross comparisons of like previous times. It would categorize certain characters, certain abilities, and say, hey, this ability is similar to this ability, and here's how the pick rate increased. Here's how the perform like the map stats increased for like a specific like gadget or like a specific like character.
Mhm.
Um, and it allowed me to do a lot more qualitative work. It allowed me to understand, like, give the players a little bit more focus, give a lot more like qualitative understanding of how opponents were playing.
Mhm.
I think it's very important, but it's very easy at the level that people are coming in, like analysts come in without the experience. Like even if they go in and get a degree, it's very easy to fool yourself on the data.
Yeah.
Um, like very easy. Like even myself, like trying to make sure that I'm building these like systems that are as unbiased as can be, or like having to account for that bias is like a very big thing because like me as a developer, when I'm like coding and I'm like building algorithms to like help me, it's going to when I see something that doesn't seem right, I'm building it towards how I think it should be read, and it's very interpretive. So like I play very much towards objectives. I play very much towards structure, discipline, and so a lot of my formulas and rating systems are going to give more benefit to that.
Yeah.
And I'm aware of that. So when I go in, I try and actually have like, after I've done the development, I try and have like a different mindset of like, all right, like I'm going to give more benefit to the individual plays that are being made, the context of engagements. And I know that there are other people that don't necessarily do that. They'll just write something, or they'll have their own opinion and they don't change it based off the
Right.
data.
Right.
So I think it's important, but I also think it's like context trumps any like you can have all the information in the world, and
Right.
if you don't have the context, it doesn't
Well,
matter.
like the simplest example would be if I look at my KDA in my normal competitive games, I'm like, wow, I'm fragging out, I'm getting 20, 20 kills or whatever, and I'm only dying 6 times. I should have carried. But then if you look at the breakdown of each round, all 20 of those kills might have happened in rounds that we were like 5v1 or something. And
Yeah,
we
yeah,
just lose all those rounds. That's why we lost. I'm like, so those kills are actually irrelevant. Um, so
yeah.
yeah, I think that's really difficult, and I know the debate is mainly in the league community around the use of analytics because they assume that the game is too complex to really use analytics in a meaningful way. In Valorant, do you have access to APIs so you could actually track at a micro level, like okay,
Uh,
what where agents are using utility, that kind of thing per round?
we don't have it at that level.
Hmm.
Technically, the professional scene can practice on a special client that gives them like their own like data.
Hmm.
Um, but there's no reason for you like, you're essentially offering like, it would be me offering another team to have access to, like, data when I can just get it myself. So it
Um,
now
but even
it's
even in like in a competitive setting, like or a competitive arena, like let's say you guys are in an actual tournament, all those matches have to be played on a separate server, right? So
yeah, yeah,
is
and
that data,
then
I guess, available for
on that
analysis?
side, I don't think it's available to us,
Mm,
because I when I first came over, like, the whole reason why I came over to Valorant was to bring my analytics system
mm-hmm,
to Valorant.
mm-hmm,
Like, my first 4 months were supposed to be me just focusing on coding.
mm-hmm.
That didn't end up happening because we didn't necessarily have the best coaching structure there. It was very like, the players are getting neglected, and I was very much like, "I'm not gonna sit here and just watch everything burn down." Um, but when I first came over, the only way that I was going to get API access was I had to make a public, like, I would have to make like a Blitz OPGG.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'd have to make like something that is serviceable to the public to have access to
Wow.
like any form of API.
Wow. Okay. Huh. That's
So
interesting because
it makes things a little bit more difficult for like
yeah,
for
that
us.
is really interesting given that, League sort of has an open API policy.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, Riot decided Valorant doesn't.
I,
Do
I
you
could be mistaken on that, but that was what I was given from TSM at the time, and it's what I've gotten from their like the API docs is that you have to build like a public project.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean that sort of makes sense too, but I've also, that opens up a whole can of worms with, having, like you said, right now all your like scrim data and all that stuff is available for everybody. It sort of doesn't make sense unless they did it on a regional basis, and then you could think of like, obviously you want to win domestic championships, but you might be progressing the development of your own region better by having
Yeah,
everyone have
yeah.
access to better data. But um, I guess, what are some of the big challenges that you are facing right now in a short term? Like, what are some things that you guys are focused on right now going into sort of the next part of the split after Masters?
I think for us, a lot of it is going to be the micro level.
Hmm.
I think so. If you look at like a team like Paper X, who has done well internationally or done well like domestically,
Hmm.
done well in both senses. They're very micro driven. Like
Yeah.
they practice in a lot of ranks. They do a lot more ranked than anybody else in the league. They're always top 10 in the leaderboards for at least 4 to 5 of them.
I was gonna say at
Um,
Champs last year too, they talk about how a lot of their strats feel like competitive strats, like ranked strats. They don't feel like
and
competitive like
it
pro style strats. They're like, wow, you guys did this like it's solo queue. Like you just
and
like,
it's I mean that's sort of the mentality, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but
no.
it's like when you play ranked and you play a certain way, if you play enough ranked games, because of the diversity of players that you play against, you get used to a large number of situations that you can't get in practice.
Right.
So if you're taking certain map control, like let's say since a lot of your community is likely going to be from League,
Hmm.
let's say like this game, I'm a jungler, I'm going to focus on my invades and like top side, or I'm gonna focus on my bot side. Like I want to get all the dragons in the game, and you're
Yeah.
focusing heavily on your team fights around the dragon objective or like the invades. You're getting a lot more exposure to how the top laner reacts to your top lane invades, or how the bot lane the bot priority pressures for you to be able to get like Drake pressure or like priority um, and you keep doing that for like weeks on end, and you just get so many different people, and you get so many different champs, you get so many different angles of engagement that eventually, like as much as two unique people may have a different way of playing the game or like different mentality, you'll start seeing like naturally you'll have better game sense because you'll start seeing like similarities in how they play.
Hmm.
And I think that like PaperX leverages that a lot, where they play a lot of micro game,
Hmm.
and you have to like we went into our game against them the past week knowing that we had to be shooting like we had like very good foundation, we had very good fundamentals, we had very good team play,
Hmm.
but we knew that if we didn't react as quick as we could, we didn't shoot back as quick as we could, we didn't respond in the right ways, that we would get punished over and over again. And realistically, we went in knowing that our odds were like really low going up against them, but we knew after our first match, which was on their map pick, and the players expected to get obliterated, whether they said it or not. Like you could tell from their history, some of these players have gone like 0-6 against them, like never
Yeah.
dropped a map or picked up a map against them.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of our focus is priority on their making sure that they're like, rebuild confidence. I mean, the players know now with how close it went that that very easily, like where like they can see that they're scaling,
Yeah.
um, like in the region, and like we're expecting to be like we want to be at champions. Every team wants to be at champions, but
Right.
like the the players understand
Especially
what
because
it's
it's at
going to
home.
take.
It's at home this year.
Yeah, especially now um, that like they kind of understand that the process that we brought in to the preseason
Yeah.
is working in getting them to where they want to be.
Right.
Um, so I think it's going to be a lot of like the focusing on individual players,
Mhm.
making sure that they're like pushing themselves farther. Like something that I'm introducing a lot of is like when they are playing ranked, what are they trying to get out of it? And this is something that applies for any game.
Mhm.
Is like you can go in, you can just like hit the Q button, brain off, don't care, play your game, or I'm
Right.
gonna focus on this champion. But if you don't go in with intent to your ranked games, then you're just like you're wasting your time. Like it's not like you have to like try hard every time. If you go in and say, "Hey, I just want to blow off steam," that's fine. You've given yourself a reason to play that game.
Sure.
But if you're going in expecting to become a better player and you aren't giving yourself like a direction to become a better player, then like you end up just wasting your time. Or if
Yeah.
you end up like tilting yourself, it's like, why are you tilted? Like, sure you lost, but you're not here to win the rank game. You're here to improve in this area.
I think that's
Um,
definitely something that's true for players of any level, right? I struggle with that a lot, where I focus so much on the win loss. You kind of lose sight of, well, a win could actually be negative for you in terms of development, and a loss could be more beneficial in some cases. Like
I would-
some of those games where you go in and you actually played like crap and you got carried. Like that's not a good game to take any meaningful, like, oh, I won, so it's all good. Like, like,
yeah,
you want to go into some of the losses where you actually carry the team and you realize, oh, if I just not made these couple mistakes, we should have won this.
yeah.
Those are way more meaningful for sure. Uh, so I guess with the region kind of, feeling a little bit like all these teams are obviously super incentivized this specific year because Champions is going to be in Korea. Um, how do you feel that things are changing for you guys? Do you feel like there's more pressure on the team right now, or is it just kind of that same old, like, mentality of we're just trying to be the best that we can be?
Um, I think it's just the same. I mean, if anything, you want to like sure, like it may be different because we have a mixed roster, but like
Hmm.
I want to get back to like me personally, I want to get back to I was always making top 5 at international events, always making it into playoffs, always like I was always making every event and then I was always making top 5
Hmm.
and I hate not being there and being able to go to a new country is great. But here like it would be really great to win in Korea, especially cuz like I mean, specifically for T1 is I love the League of Legends roster, but I know that these players feel like they're shadowed. Like
Yeah,
it's not
yeah.
even like in a negative way. It's just
I mean,
when
you're under the
your
shadow
only other
of a
team,
giant, like.
your only other team on the organization is a world champion. Of course, like
Yeah,
you like on the league days, there'll be fans outside the building cheering for them as they go and like get on the shuttle to like, go compete.
yeah,
And it's like you know that the players come in every day, like every day that they see that, and they're like, I want that. And
yeah, yeah. That,
like
that
it's
there's
not like
there's a very specific organizational pressure on you guys compared to
yeah,
almost any other
yeah,
org, because it's not just, oh, you guys are current world champions. I mean, your T1 is the most championship heavy team in league, which is, the
yeah.
oldest esport or largest esport at this point.
So
Not
it's like
oldest, but
if we can win in Korea,
yeah,
then like that helps like everything. Sorry, I think I
yeah.
just hit the power
No, that's
switch.
right. Yeah,
That helps like everybody.
yeah. The
Like
legacy thing is huge for sure. Um, I guess we kind of divert topics a little bit, but I've worked with you in the past. You had talked to me about, some of your own health issues. For context, like, you can kind of share however much you want and maybe how it sort of reflects in who you are and how your approach is towards everything you're doing.
So I have a few hard issues that go all the way back to 2015. Um, some of them are like smaller than they used to be as
Mhm.
far as being like issues that impact me. Some of them are pretty bad. Um, I think the big thing I'm facing right now is it's not necessarily like a I don't want to give like the issue that I have, but to blanket it is I have heart failure. Um, Probably I'm hitting towards like the later stages of class 3, maybe like mid to late stage, which has been like pretty rough. Basically, I'm like having like a harder time like working out. Some days like it could be very hard for to be in like a bunch of physical pain and to like want to like to work. But it also has like driven me to be here because like before I got into esports, the whole reason why I got in was because I was like bedridden for months. I was going into college for robotics engineering and I had to drop out because I couldn't make it to school every day. I can't like I couldn't drive because I had like a hard episode while driving and I like totaled my car. So it was like, all right, I can't just lay in bed and waste away all day. So it was like this one winter I saw that like an org was looking for an assistant coach and I was like laying in bed and I was like, you know what? I feel like every time that I watch esports, like this is like neglected. Like this is an area that I don't think anybody touches on. So it was like I'm gonna message them. I'm gonna like give myself a week to like to build up what I think that a team would need from an assistant coach and from an analyst, and I'm gonna shoot my shot. So it's like because I have this like ailment, I got this opportunity that used to be like a childhood dream for me,
Yeah.
especially to be on TSM and to be on T1. So I started out as like a like the old TSM CS:GO roster that's
Mhm.
like was like Astralis.
Mhm.
I started with them, and then they left, and then I started watching Bjergsen, and then that got me into League, which got
Mhm.
me into Faker, which got me into T1, and then
Yeah.
now it's like here I am on TSM and T1.
That's awesome.
So it's like
So do you feel like in some ways this is something I talk about a lot actually is for for everyone's got their own experience, their light switch moment if you will. For me what kind of flipped the switch in my mind was I was in the military and I was in Iraq and we got hit by an IED and in that moment it was just all of a sudden like I don't know how much time I have left. Right. Like that is it was a realization. I think it's something everybody knows, but it was a realization point for me. It was like, I don't know how much time I have left. And then from that point on, I was like, I'm just gonna do whatever I want to do. I'm gonna pursue everything I want to pursue. I want to like take the risks that sometimes you internally tell yourself maybe I shouldn't do this because I don't know if it's gonna work out or not. And it's completely changed the trajectory of my life. I was never a great student, and I was like, I'm gonna apply to college. Got into college, and I was like, I'm gonna apply to PT school. I only applied to the number one PT school in the country, and I got in. I was like, this is it kind of perspective shifted me. And then coming out of school is the same thing. I've always loved gaming, and I was like, there's that'd be the dream is to work in professional esports, and I just figured out a way to get into it. Like you kind of just
yeah,
shoot your shot and you're
yeah.
like, why not?
I mean, you
What
have
do I
to.
have to lose? And I think so many people are held back by that internal like fear of failure, I think, when in reality, what is failure? Like you never get to any sort of progress without failing at a micro level, but the macro is, well, you end up getting to where you want to be. It's not like you've never lost the game. It's not like your teams have never lost. It's not like
Yeah,
you've never had
yeah,
stumbles and failures and all that stuff. But I think in some ways, your experience and sort of like the mentality that you don't know how much time you have makes you, I don't know, put more into the time you have, right? Like, is that something that you feel like affects your mentality or approach with coaching too?
yeah. I think it's had a big impact on like my like coaching style because I'm very much a like there's different ways to coach, there's different ways to be leaders. So I'm very much like a servant leader
Mhm.
in the sense of like you have some leaders that are very
Yeah.
dictatorship a mindset, which can be a way to lead and it is something that a lot of teams need is like you need someone to say, hey, like shut up, we're gonna
Mhm.
do this, or like
Mhm.
this is where we're struggling. And I can do that, but the approach that I take whenever I'm working around like a little bit more of like the traditional leader is I'm almost like I try to be more like a parent, like leader, where it's like I look at a player at their individual level. I'll write up like a document about like what makes them tick, their personalities, like
Mhm.
the issues that they have, and because like especially like with my health, it's like I don't plan to be like a dad because I don't want like any of this genetic like because a lot of the stuff is going to be genetic.
Mhm.
I don't want it to be something that affects them. So it's like if I can't have kids, like I want to like as a parent, you want to build someone up to kind of like lead on your legacy in a way. And it's like it's not like I care about myself as much when I'm focusing on these players, but like whenever they leave me, I want to know that I was able to help them. So as a coach, like some coaches, like they get a player, they don't care. Like if the player leaves, like good, like that's on that player. Like don't talk to me again, or like you don't care how they develop. But for me, it's like I look back and even at players that I don't see eye to eye with anymore, I'll look back and see like, are you still are you still following the same process that I gave you, or how did you grow upon what I taught you? And it, like, very much impacts, like, the way that I coach, like, the just having, like, this, like, hard issue because it's like, I wanna care for as many people as I can before I go, and I could do that outside of coaching, but as well with coaching is, like, if I know what it takes long term, like, I'm very much about long-term development for a coach. If I can give you these resources to regardless of if I'm here or not, to be able to go on
Mhm.
um, and to progress, I think it's really good. And then to touch back up on the failures side of things is like we did like in R6, like we failed. I'm trying to like separate the teams. We failed 3 times before making it, and I would not have wanted to won the first time that I went with them. We could have
Right.
very well won in 2022 or 2020, um, when we had like a really bad head coach, um, and like in our hearts, like those players knew that they wanted to win. They thought they had won. We got third place at Worlds, and this was like right after they got their seventh place, like in like the prior season. Um, but I honestly think it gave them the drive. Like if you know that you should have won and you didn't win, you know that you're heading in the right direction. You fail the next year. We got fourth place. And it's like, all right, like we were able to be consistent. We know what we're doing is right, but what is that extra percentage that you need to squeeze out?
Yeah.
And then, like, it's literally like we go through and we have the most dominant year, and then we end up going like we have like a split where it's just really bad for us. Like we're trying to rebuild systems, and like we're trying to get rid of some of the underlying issues, that is like more like foundational issues, so we have a really bad season, and then we go into the last chance qualifier, and we're able to build back up our platform. We're able to go through every issue that we've ever had and work through all of the issues, and then we win it. And
Yeah.
it's a lot more valuable for us to have won it the third time around, fourth time around, because we were able to show that we were consistently at the top,
Mhm.
and then we were able to win it in the end. Because
Yeah.
that's the issue. Is if we had won it the first time, it's very easy the first time to get complacent and
Mhm.
just say, "Hey, we won. All right, now we're gonna take better paying offers somewhere else, or we're gonna try again." But because everybody else is trying to outscale us, we're just gonna like let ourselves fall off.
Right. Yeah.
But
No, that's really
I do
powerful.
think
Like
very, very big.
I definitely think that's a hallmark of perennially championship rosters or orgs is that tenacity. Like for T1 to win last year too in league, right? Like they lost in finals the year before, and you see it in all the players' face. I'm really happy they ran the same roster back
Yeah.
because it gave all those guys a chance to like prove everyone wrong again. Like, it's like
And it
you were
matters so much
so close. You were
because
so close.
you know the extra percentage, and
Yeah.
unless you have, like, a player conflict, you should be running it back.
Yeah.
Like, you look at, like, even G2 now is,
Yeah.
like, they've been a powerhouse in Europe for so long, but they ran back the same roster because I honestly think, like, watching, like, League Worlds last year, like,
Yeah.
they could have had a much bigger run
No,
if they hadn't
they
lost to
they
NA, but
completely choked that game. It was wild.
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that's why you play the games. Anything can happen, right?
Yeah,
Um
yeah.
so I'm gonna end with a few other hot takes for you because we're about an hour here. Who do you think is the best team in the world right now?
Um, that would be, T1's league roster, of course.
Well, I look specifically
Yeah, yeah, I
Valorant.
know. Um, I think it's really hard to say right now.
Do you watch a lot of the other
If
regions? Like,
I watch all the other regions. So Europe right now, Europe is usually very structured. And right now we're seeing a lot of comp diversity,
mhm,
which either if they're still in the structured mindset, it means that there's a lot of uncertainty.
yeah,
Either like teams aren't like they don't have their identity yet,
mhm,
or they aren't like comfortable um, with the meta, which is understandable because it's kind of the first season where
mhm,
they like a lot of teams have like, new rookies, or they're like rebuilding their entire roster.
mhm,
I think Fnatic is strong, but I think it's very easy with a roster like that to just kind of like to just like to slow scale, which is what they look like they're trying to do.
mhm,
Like Many moved to an assistant coach position, who was a previous head coach. The roster's sort of like T1, where if you have fundamentals, like T1 just made like league, they just made like their like, coaching change,
mhm.
and they brought in a leader. So it's like you don't need a fundamentals coach if you have won a world championship,
Right.
or your players get to a certain level. So you need a leader that's able to like, progress them. And I think Fnatic's sort of doing the same thing, where like Minnie's a good leader, but I think that they brought in like a different coach to let like Minnie stay on the back burner to kind of like recover because he was like
Mhm.
burning himself out.
Yeah.
And then in Americas, a lot of Americas is about adaptation, but they end up like copying off of one another because they just see like one team dominating scrims. So I think it's very hard for like NA teams to really stay at the top. I think like NRG right now is looking to do the same thing as Fnatic, where they aren't
Yeah.
really showing anything special now, but when it comes time for like for Masters, I think they're gonna be a lot stronger.
I have a lot of faith in Chet. Like his game planning mid game and stuff. Like when they call the timeout is just it's crazy what he's come up with in the past too. So
Oh yeah,
yeah,
he's very good at knowing what teams are trying to do
yeah,
and breaking it down in the moment. I honestly think for like Madrid right now, like which is like the like
hmm
our MSI,
hmm
really, I don't think that there are that many teams that are looking super like concrete. Like you have some really strong teams in North America, but
yeah,
then they all have underlying flaws.
yeah,
Even the teams in the Pacifics, like Gen G is very like they're very strat heavy, very
hmm
execute heavy.
hmm
Paper X is very micro heavy, which has gotten them far in international events, but they're kind of a team where if you play them once, like recently, that it's a little bit easier to understand how they're gonna play. Because you get into a server with a team from another region and they just start throwing like the entire bike at you. You don't know you don't know how to handle that pacing.
yeah. I mean, we saw last year with
Uh,
EG, right? Like they kind of just started like fist fighting people. Like they're like, all right,
yeah,
well,
oh, I mean that was a lot of their they were backs up against the wall.
yeah,
They didn't know like they knew that like they were like tearing themselves apart. They're tearing each other apart.
yeah.
Figuratively, it's like, well, we've got nothing else to lose, so let's just win.
Yeah, yeah, and
And they did.
that seems to be some of the strats like energy is like, well, let's just see what Demon One can do. We'll put him in a position to kill a few people, and it's much easier to win 5v2.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's
like,
how like Loud operated before when they had Aspas was like
yeah,
send him in a direction
yeah,
and we'll call around him. If he
yeah,
gets a couple kills, congrats. If he gets some space, congrats.
yeah,
Like we'll
yeah.
take that space.
So it's nice when you have the superstar that can do that on Duelist, but
Yeah.
cool. And then we already talked a lot about Pacific region closing in. I definitely have strong what's the word? I have a lot of faith in Asia to catch up. I just think historically, like you said, the work ethic, the culture around the work. I mean, that's almost a guaranteed progression that's going to occur. Whereas, in North America, it's like we're still kind of riding on the fact that we have a huge player base and there's a lot of mechanical talent just kind of sitting here. Um, Long term, I'm hoping that there's a little bit more in the coaching structure and a little bit more on the developmental side, which we'll see what happens because tier two here seems to be falling off a little bit, and that's going to be challenging to replenish a lot of these teams as rosters break down. So
Yeah.
um,
There's a lot of talent in tier two that
yeah,
is like, gonna get neglected.
yeah, and unfortunately, if it doesn't get fixed soon, a lot of them probably are going to pivot games or just go into content creation. Like that's the other challenge here is that content creation is such a viable direction to go instead of pro. Like I actually struggle with why a lot of the pros who are in tier 2 just don't go straight into full-time streaming. I mean, you're gonna make arguably twice as much money, and like,
Oh yeah.
it's way more sustainable.
Yeah.
Like, so, but yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time, being open about everything. I've been a big fan of T1 in the Pacific region since you guys moved over there, and I'm glad I don't have any conflicts anymore with like rooting for a team in too many teams in NA. But I wish you the best of luck in preparing for the next split. And unfortunately, you guys aren't going to be at Madrid, but hoping you make Shanghai is the next one, right? Yeah,
Yeah, Shanghai's the next one.
that'll be cool. I'm really, really, really trying to make it to champs in Korea this year. That's
Well, so are we. So
yeah.
yeah,
So I hopefully I see you there. But
would be
yeah,
nice.
best of luck with everything.
Thank
All
you.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.